Welcome back to the Dershow. Lots of things going on in the world. Tonight we will have a debate between the two vice presidential candidates. We are also seeing conflicts all through the Middle East, with Israel sending boots on the ground into Lebanon. Obviously, Israel has the right to enforce a UN resolution. Last time there was a war, the UN imposed the ceasefire, which Israel accepted on condition that the Hezbollah troops move beyond the Litani River, away from the border with Israel. They didn't do it, and they're sending rockets, and 60,000 Israelis have been kept from going home. And so the UN failed to enforce its ceasefire and its resolution demanding that Hezbollah move beyond the Litani River. The United States has not been able to achieve that result. And so now Israel is doing it on its own. Obviously, Iran is not accepting this. And the threats from Iran are great and considerable, as are the counter threats from Israel. We're at a very critical time in the Middle East. Israel is flexing its muscles, finally, and saying to the Houthi rebels, no, you can't just fire on Israeli ships, American ships, and stop all shipping in the area. Israel is going to respond, and it has responded, and will continue to respond, just as it maintains control over the Philadelphia Korea and other areas in the Gaza Strip. Hamas continues to hold hostages, as many as 100, many 50 or 60 of them are alive. 4 or so are Americans. So we're seeing a very unstable situation in the Middle East, and we'll be reporting on that as developments warrant. But today's a political day as well. We will see the perhaps final debate leading up to the presidential election. Tonight, we're going to see a debate between Tim Walz, the Democratic nominee for vice president, and J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee for vice president. One of them will be elected, and one of them will just be a heartbeat away from the presidency. I have a point of view on this. A lot of people will disagree with my point of view, and good. That's the purpose of this show. So let me tell you what my point of view is. I think both presidential candidates, both President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, have selected the wrong people to be their running mates. Both would have benefited by nominating somebody who moved the ticket more to the center. Both Trump and Harris are regarded as extremists within their party. Trump, not for his policies, but primarily for his personality and his threats. Harris for her policies and what she did when she was in California, and some of the views she's expressed in the past that she's now trying to move away from. The smart thing for either candidate would have been to select a vice presidential nominee who moved them toward the center. Obviously, Harris had several options. Kelly on the one hand, Shapiro on the other hand, who would have moved her toward the center. Instead, she picked Walz, who is regarded as a progressive. I hate that term because, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive. I think of myself as a progressive person, but progressives have become fascists. The people who call themselves progressives are now on the forefront of denying freedom of speech and other freedoms, and moving the Democratic Party toward the AOC wing. And so Walz is widely regarded as a progressive governor who has moved his state to the left and away from the center on many issues. And she would have been so much smarter to have moved somebody toward the center. And I think, this election will be determined by independent voters. There are the people who are going to vote for Harris no matter what. And there are people who are going to vote for Trump no matter what. And it's people at the center, people like me and some of you who are watching, who maybe even haven't made up their minds and would be moved, certainly would have been moved by who the vice presidential nominee was. And many of those independents are saying to themselves, "Gee, we were hoping the vice presidential selections would move our candidate or our potential candidate to the center, but that hasn't happened." The same thing is true of Donald Trump. He could have selected Nikki Haley. He could have selected somebody else who is more centrist, but instead he selected J.D. Vance, who is regarded as to the right ideologically of Trump and more like Tucker Carlson in many ways, more of an isolationist and tougher on some issues that are important to centrist politics, voters. So I think it was a tactical mistake on both candidates' parts. Maybe that cooled itself out. But if one of the two candidates had selected somebody closer to the center, I think that candidate would have won the election. So it's rare that selecting a vice presidential candidate impacts the election. It certainly happened with John Kennedy. He became president because he selected Lyndon Johnson, who was more to the center and more. Turns out it wasn't true. It turns out Lyndon Johnson was more to the left than John F. Kennedy, but nobody knew that at the time. Johnson was perceived as being, a Texan, Southern Democrat, etc., and he helped win that election. I can't think of any other election in my lifetime which was really determined by the selection of the vice president. And here it may not be as well because both candidates selected candidates to the extreme side of them. As I said, that may cancel out this issue. But I am absolutely persuaded that if either candidate had selected somebody more to the center, that candidate would now be on the road to the White House. Now, how will that be reflected in tonight's debate? I think that each candidate will try to press the other candidate in a way that shows their extremes. I don't know whether or not the moderators will do that. We'll see whether or not these moderators are somewhat more objective and neutral than previous moderators. But I'm sure that the candidates will try to force their opponents into positions that deny them the vote of centrists. So we'll watch and see. From all accounts, J.D. Vance is probably a better debater and probably better on his feet than Tim Walz. Tim Walz seems like a hail fellow, well met, folksy guy who's not much on policies. When somebody asked him a question about the Middle East at a state fair recently, he was made clear by his handlers that nobody wanted him to answer that question. He's not high on policies. Remember that neither candidate, indeed none of the four people running, have any real substantial foreign policy experience. Of course, Trump was the president for 4 years. Kamala Harris has been the vice president for 3.5 years. So inevitably, they are thrust into foreign policy making decisions. But none of the four have previous experience in their in their roles before they became national figures and running for high national office as foreign policy. Unlike Joe Biden, who had enormous experience in foreign policy over the years. But let's remember also, Bill Clinton had no experience in foreign policy, and I think did a pretty good job on foreign policy. And George Bush the first had the most experience in foreign policy than anybody ever running for president in American history, and did a terrible job on foreign policy. So you never know what a person's background and experiences will lead them to when they become the president of the United States. Obama had no experience, and probably in his second term was the worst foreign policy president in modern American history. He made both Bushes look really, really good. He made so many mistakes, so many blunders. What we're seeing today in the Middle East is largely a function of Barack Obama being Neville Chamberlain and facilitating Iran's strength, eliminating the sanctions, letting them sign a fake a treaty. It wasn't a treaty; it didn't get confirmation by the Senate, but it had all the earmarks of a treaty in which they promised they wouldn't develop nuclear weapons, and then immediately violated all those promises surreptitiously. So we're closer to a disaster in the Middle East, largely because of Barack Obama's horrible second term as foreign policy. And what I worry about is Kamala Harris is much more a product of Barack Obama's policies than of Joe Biden's policies. So that's for me a big factor in my upcoming vote in early November. We'll wait and see. There are so many things playing out now in the world that I'm going to take the virtue of my strong opposition to early voting and wait until I see what happens in early November before I make my final decision. I'm sure there are a lot of Americans like that. Unfortunately, we have early voting now, and so we're going to have people voting without knowing the full picture. Now, I'm in favor of early of alternate voting to going to the ballot box on November 5th. I'm in favor of that for people who are serving in the Army. But by the way, they can vote on November 4th, and their votes could be submitted before November 5th. I'm in favor of that for people who have inevitable needs to travel. I am not in favor of anybody voting in September, or really anybody voting in early October. I think it's a violation of democratic principles to have people vote before all the debates and before all the events that are occurring in the world today. And so for me, I think people should wait until November 5th if they can. I think they should, if they can, go to the ballot box and do the American thing. I used to love to do that, to walk around the corner, say hello to my neighbors, and go into that little booth. And sometimes I would try to take my little children when they were 5 or 6 years old. Sometimes they would let the little child in the booth and watch me vote. Sometimes they wouldn't. But it's a great American tradition of taking that walk around the corner a few blocks, standing online for a while, chatting with your neighbors, and then pulling the lever or filling in the hole with a pencil. That's becoming obsolete now as people vote by mail, people vote by computer, people vote in all kinds of different ways that not only create problems of ballot security, but also, for me, very fundamentally, it's like I've given this analogy before, like if I'm arguing to a jury, I don't want the jurors to sign their verdict form before I finish my closing argument and before all the evidence is in. And that's what's happening when people are voting in September and October. And I don't like it. And so I'm not going to do it. And we are seeing so many developments. I mean, my vote will depend in part on how each side responds to what's going on today, not only in the Middle East, but in America, in Europe, and all other parts of the world. We live in a dynamic world where things happen every single day, and things that happen should be influencing our votes in the election. So let's wait and see. And I want to hear this debate tonight. Not that my vote will be determined by the substance of what the vice presidential candidates say. It's certainly possible if any of them says something that disqualifies him, in my mind, from being president, because that's what the vice president is, somebody who could become a president. We've had that so many times in our history of people becoming a president when we only voted for them for vice president. Indeed, some very good presidents have emerged in that way. Harry Truman and Teddy Roosevelt and a range of others. Some terrible presidents, Andrew Johnson. have emerged in the same way. And so we have to be very, very careful who we vote for vice president, because when you vote for vice president, you vote for president. So, let's all watch that debate very, very, very carefully. They'll be very scripted, obviously. Their goal is not to lose votes. They have been told, we're not expecting you to gain us any votes, but first do no harm. Don't do anything that might hurt us. And it is certainly possible. Each of them have instincts that move them, in Vance's case, to the right of Trump's policies, and in Walz's case, to the left of Harris's policies. And especially Harris is trying desperately to forget about what she said in the past and to pretend that she has reinvented herself as a new person, a centrist person. That's why, to me, so surprising that she nominated Waltz. Is Waltz ready to become the president? Is Vance ready to become the president? There are real doubts about that in the minds, I think, of many Americans. I think the debate tonight is designed to try to allay some of those doubts. I doubt there'll be success along those lines. I doubt that many Americans today would vote for either Vance or Waltz to become president of the United States, but that's essentially what they're voting for when they vote to make somebody vice president. Especially the case with Trump. Trump's, by the time, if he wins, is halfway through his term, he'll be in his 80s. And we look at the Metropolitan Life Insurance tables. I know, I'm 86. I look at those tables all the time when I have to decide whether to buy insurance or plan for the future. 80-year-olds, they're on a list of how many years you have, especially when you're in the presidency, which is tension 24/7, less of a problem. Obviously, with Harris, and of course, we will see, as soon as either person is elected president, we'll see extremists on the other side trying to impeach them. Impeachment has become today a political a tool of the day rather than the extreme remedy that the founders of our Constitution contemplated. But it started with the Republicans impeaching Clinton. The Democrats, of course, were going to impeach Nixon, but he deserved to be impeached. Clinton did not deserve to be impeached, and Trump did not deserve to be impeached. But the tit for tat, you do it to us, we'll do it to you. So I guarantee you that within the first year of whoever is president of the United States, we're going to see some people from the extremes of the opposing party moving for impeachment. It's not going to succeed. Impeachment is almost impossible because it needs 2/3 of the Senate. And today, the Senate is always divided very closely. Indeed, right now it's divided equally. And so you have the vice president casting the deciding vote. You're not going to see removal. You may see impeachment, because impeachment requires only a majority of 1 in the House of Representatives. But impeachment itself is not a remedy except a symbolic one. It's removal. And we're not going to see any removals in my lifetime, and probably in your lifetime, unless we have a situation where the Senate has an overwhelming majority of the opposite party of the incumbent president, a very, very unlikely scenario. And so I don't think we're going to see the 25th Amendment, which is even harder to implement than the impeachment provisions of the Constitution itself. So I think who you vote for president, we're stuck with for 4 years. Fortunately, it is 4 years. It's not 8 years. It used to be almost an automatic reelection. We've seen that no longer be the case. George Bush I was not reelected. Jimmy Carter was not reelected, and Donald Trump was not reelected. And so we're seeing 4-year terms, not 8-year terms. We used to see 8-year terms almost automatically, but that's also changed historically. Look, the Constitution is a dynamic document. It changes with reality. It's a structure for liberty, a structure for freedom, a structure for the separation of powers. You see people trying to undo that structure A bunch of Democrats want to pack the Supreme Court, which would eliminate the Supreme Court as a mechanism of checks and balances. And I'm sure if the shoe were on the other foot, Democrats and Republicans alike would try to structure the Supreme Court in a way that serves their partisan interests. And we have, scholars of the Constitution, people claim to be scholars of the Constitution, who interpret the Constitution only to serve the interests of their own political party, as if Jefferson and Madison and Adams and Washington and all the framers of the Constitution wrote the Constitution for one party rather than to govern the nation as a whole. So we're going to watch the debate tonight. We're going to watch to see if anybody makes a mistake. We'll ask the question. I hope you will ask the question that I'm asking. Why did each candidate make the decision to nominate or select as vice presidential candidate somebody who moved him further away from, or her further away from the center? Will this have an impact on the election itself? I think it will. I think it already has on polls. Right now, the election looks like a deadlock. Slight advantage, Harris, according to some polls, but the history of polls show that unless the Democrats have a strong advantage, sometimes the Republicans, as happened in 2016, win despite the polls, whether that's because people lie to pollsters, whether it's because people change their minds. We don't know. But, the only poll that counts is the one that occurs on election day. We're also going to see, as the result of some changes and some challenges, we may not have a result by midnight on the night of election. Usually we do. I remember vividly staying up very late in the year 2000 and not getting a result there. We didn't get a result until December. And other elections. We were having a party at our house in 2016, and most of the people at our party believed that it would be a victory party for Hillary Clinton. And of course, that didn't happen. So I had a lot of leftover champagne. But we don't know what time the election results will come through. What's more important is that in the end, every American will say the election was fair, and whoever is declared the winner was the winner. I don't think anybody wants to see a repetition of 2020, where there were doubts, some reasonable, some unreasonable, reasonable in Pennsylvania, unreasonable in my view, in some other places, about the outcome of the election. The one thing that's crucial is that the American public have complete faith in the electoral results, which is why I have for years advocated the creation of an election commission based on the most distinguished people in America who everybody trusts, the Walter Cronkites of the modern world, that could resolve disputes, ongoing disputes about the election, and not leave them to the courts, especially today, where the courts themselves are subject to political misuse and weaponization, and where there's never been in modern history a time when the courts are held in lower regard than they are today. So stay tuned. Debate tonight, activities in the Middle East. We don't know how they will be resolved. I'm in touch with my friends in Israel on a regular basis, and there is fear. And there is always fear in Israel. Just one more word about Israel. If only the rest of the world would leave Israel alone, Israel could be a real light into the nations. It can help provide technological, medical, and other. If Israel were allowed to perform the biblical function of turning swords into plowshares and nuclear weapons into nuclear medicine, the benefits that would accrue to the world would be incredibly high and incredibly great. And so all Israel asks is, leave us alone. Let us be. Stop attacking us on October 7th and October 8th from Hezbollah. Stop sending rockets from from the Houthis. Stop missiles from Iran. Stop. Just leave Israel alone. And Israel will, it's a tiny little country the size of New Jersey that outperforms so many larger countries in the world. Startup nation not only for its own benefit and the benefit of stockholders, but for the benefit of all people in the world through its technology and other resources. Israel is both the Athens and the Sparta of the Middle East. Athens, of course, was the city in Greece that specialized in philosophy and knowledge. Sparta was the leading military power. Israel has combined the two. It is both the Athens and the Sparta. It is the Sparta because it's the Athens. Today's Spartas require the knowledge and intelligence of Athens. The only reason Israel maintains its qualitative edge over its millions and millions and millions of enemies is because of its technological advantage. So let's hope someday that it will be able to beat its swords into plowshares, and the beneficiaries will be the whole world. Okay, so let's turn to some questions. Netanyahu is more and more looking like the leader of the Western world. Biden and others should take note. There's a lot of truth to that. Certainly a leader in the Middle East. Biden is famous for his negatives. No, don't. Ceasefire. But he's done nothing to bring about real peace in the Middle East. Now, he obviously helps Israel, and particularly helps him in relation to Iran. But, I think Netanyahu has filled a vacuum that has been left, certainly by the United Nations as well as by the United States. Professor, do you think anti-Israel sentiment in the United States is the result of widespread anti-Semitism, or is it more a consequence of how corrupted the media that only presents the Hamas-Hezbollah side of the argument? Well, it's both, and it's one causes the other. There is a disdain among elites, certainly media elites, for anything Jewish, and certainly anything Israeli. And you see it with CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post always presenting the anti-Israel side more affirmatively than the pro-Israel side. Many of those elitists are Jews. So you can't attribute it solely to anti-Semitism, but in Europe you certainly can. There's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism in Europe, and that's reflected by the BBC, which is overtly anti-Semitic. The BBC hates Israel, hates Jews, doesn't like America very much either. It's a hard left organization. By the way, I am completely against the government funding any media whatsoever. I would cut off all funding of NPR, National Public Radio. Some people call it National Palestinian Radio. I would, if I were a Brit, I would be in favor of cutting off all funding for the BBC. Let every media stand or fall on its own. The government should not be playing any role in supporting anybody who seeks the protection of the First Amendment. First Amendment has to be part of a free marketplace of ideas. So, if you want the government to fund opera, I'm not in favor of that myself, particularly, but I don't see it that it presents any great constitutional questions, although some opera companies have become very, very political. But I would rather see the government get out of the business of funding all media. But I would start with any media that purports to present the news. Not a single dollar should go to any media that in any way purports to educate or tell the American people about the news. I'd be interested in knowing what you think of that. This is a very controversial one, and one that I've heard from a number of people. The hostages are gone. I would regard them as soldiers killed in action. To do otherwise is to encourage more hostage taking. Well, you can do that if you're Iran. You can do that if you're China. But if you're a democracy and you have people who are related to the hostages, it becomes impossible to treat them as if they were soldiers who died in battle. They are living. They can be saved. But you're right. Taking decisions on behalf of the hostages may cost the lives of other people, other Israelis, other soldiers. So these are the hardest decisions. And I wish there'd be more nuanced discussion of them. There aren't today. Alan, if this immunity given to UNRWA, United Nations Refugee Organization, by the Biden administration doesn't dissuade you from voting for Obama for the fourth time, nothing will. No, you have a point. I think it's outrageous for the Justice Department to take the position that people who are employed by this organization, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Hamas, should be given immunity. You don't give immunity to murderers, rapists, and robbers. And it's interesting that many of the same people who want to give immunity to United Nations employees are the same ones who don't want to give immunity to the president of the United States, who is performing an important governmental function. Okay. Did Bibi convince you to vote for President Trump? No, we never, ever discussed that issue. He would never try to persuade me to vote for anybody. Our relationship is not that way. I don't know what his preferences are. I assume many Israelis prefer Trump over Biden because they've seen him and they saw that he recognized Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, etc. I have to say I've always liked Mr. Netanyahu. I think he's a great leader of Israel. As a Christian, I could never convert to Judaism because my belief is that by following Jesus, I am Jewish. Christians are Jews who believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. However, we should all look to the Jewish faith for moral leadership, as we are now seeing in Israel. God bless them. Look, there's a lot of theological truth to that, and I'm not a theologian, so I'm not going to get involved in that. I have friends who are Messianic Jews, born again Christians, etc., who are great supporters of Israel, and so for me, if you're a supporter of Israel, it matters not what your theological beliefs are. Netanyahu has cojones the size of Texas. Love his strength, defenses of the country. I agree. And so I think we need leaders who are bold and strong, particularly Israel does. And so I hope Israel can survive and thrive in the face of these threats. Israel is now involved in a multi-front war. Hezbollah in the north, Houthis in the south, Gaza on one side, Iran on the other side, Iraq, Syria. It's a tiny little country. It deserves the support of all free people. And so please support Israel. Listen to the debate tonight and let me have your reaction by sending me notes, which I'll read tomorrow. See you then.